Hey everyone, this is Richard with Richard Beer Reviews. So today we're going to talk about porters and stouts. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the history of porter and stouts and imperial stouts, and then I'm going to have a drink of one of my favorite stouts, and then I got a pretty cool story about Porter Flood of 1814. So here we go. Today, we mostly think of beer as light brown, refreshing, slightly caramel looking, smooth Pilsner. So Pilsner is what we call right now the super beer, because it's accepted throughout the world and is distributed throughout the world. But 200 years ago, the super beer was not the Pilsner. It was a dark, malty, thick beer with a peanutty flavor, chocolatey flavor, much stronger. And the super beer, the first super beer, was the stout. And why was it the first super beer? Is actually a lot of it was coincidence, because this is around 1700s, and this is the where steam engines, steamboats were beginning to be used as the main method of transportation. So beer can finally be distributed worldwide, and also the main products can be brought into a single port to mass produce beer. So the mass production of beer began in the 1700s, and the favorite style at the time was the stout. So that's why stout became the first super beer. And this all happened in England, and the stout actually disappeared out of England breweries till about 40 years ago. Just like in the United States, the microbreweries, that's one of the awesome things about microbreweries, because they're bringing back a lot of styles of beer that pretty much have disappeared, because the big breweries are coming in with the Budweiser, the Guinness, buying everything and trying to make us all drink the same crap. But the microbreweries are bringing back all those delicious beers of the past. So that's kind of the story of the stouts in regards why it was the first super beer. A stout is basically a creamy, dark brown or black. They call it brown black, black, and that's it's just very malty, nutty. It has a coffee flavors, coffee smell, and even chocolate flavors and chocolate smell. And this is not because they add cocoa or any chocolate. It's because it's just the flavor you get out of the malt when you cook it for a certain amount of time. That's what gives this beer. And it was thicker, and some of them were even made with byproducts of milk and stuff. So, but the porter and stouts basically back then in the 1700s were the same thing. Did the same style of brewing. The stout became a style of beer, and then the porter became a type of stout. And I'll tell a little bit about that later. So most porters and stouts are a very dark beers, like I said, and they're somewhere between 5% all the way to 15-16% for like the imperial stouts. So in those beers, the imperial stouts, they're considered to be the most tasteful, mouthful beers in the world. There's no other beer that in one sip you can get so many flavors out of it. If you haven't had an imperial stout, you need to have one, and you'll know what I'm talking about. This is a beer that is it's an after dinner beer. So so anyway, I am going to have my drink of beer right now, and then I'm going to tell you about the Great Porter Flood of 1814. Okay, so talking about porters and stouts, I have an awesome stout here. This is from a brewery in California called Dogfish Head, one of my favorite breweries because they brew the most awesome IPAs. But really, every beer I tried from them has been awesome. So this is a stout. So I expect it to be dark, thick, a little bit nutty flavor, maybe even some chocolate taste to it. So we'll see. Oh, they also have a thick head, which is, and a lot of people really like how the head clinges to the glass. You see it a lot in Guinness. Look at that, wow. Check that out. See how dark that is? See that foam? It looks like coffee. It looks like a coffee shake or something. See, you can't see through this glass. Freaking dark as hell. So, anyway, here we go. Smells delicious, definitely nutty. Definitely smell coffee in there. It almost feels like a coffee drink. It looks like a coffee drink, smells like a coffee drink. But it does, but it's a sweet coffee. Wow. Incredibly full of flavor. I wonder if this is an Imperial Stout. It doesn't say Imperial Stout, but if this is just a stout, this is like 100 times better than Guinness. This is super flavorful. This is definitely an after dinner beer. It's a beer you sip slowly and enjoy every sip. Not a beer you chug down because it tastes like crap, like Miller or Budweiser. This one you take your time and sip it slowly and enjoy the taste. So go get yourself one. Worldwide Stout. Now you know the story. Oh, here's the rest of the story. It's called the Great Porter Flood of 1814. This is a true story. You can look it up. In 1814, because of the immense production of porters or stouts in England, one of the things I haven't mentioned, one of the things that made stouts worldwide acceptance and made them more smooth and enjoyable is the aging process. So stouts, unlike other beers of the time, they're required to be aged, which meant being put in barrels. And so a lot of beer had to be produced and put in barrels to keep up with production, to keep up with the demand. So these barrels became bigger and bigger and bigger, and brewers become to age in the barrels in huge wooden tanks. These tanks became huge in size, and there were tanks that were as big as 70 feet in diameter, and they could hold up to 18,000 gallons of beer. So in October 17, 1914, in one brewery in England, it's called the Mewks Brewery. In their warehouse, they had one of these gigantic wooden tanks. And the tanks were built back then like wood barrels, like wine barrels, whiskey barrels. They're basically a bunch of wooden slats with the metal rings holding it together. But imagine that the size of the water tower in your neighborhood, if you have water towers. So one of those rings gave up, and this tank had 3,500 gallons of beer. When that gave up, it exploded this tank, and that is the weight of 571 tons of this beer. But the explosion was so massive that it exploded the other 100 tanks around it, because this was like the size of a football field full of beer tanks. It's just a visual picture of how much freaking beer the Brits were making in the 1800s. So this gigantic explosion, all this beer flooded obviously the entire warehouse, and the pressure was so much that it busted the brick walls. And if you're familiar with England, everything is tight. So like right here is the factory, across the street and it's a neighborhood. So the whole beer went into the neighborhood and busted houses and took people away. Actually, 8 people died in this stout, the Great Porter Flood of 1814. Porters and stouts are great because they're so flavorful, and they have this nutty flavor and the chocolate flavors. They're great after dinner beers. And they're also awesome with a cigar, especially a Robusto cigar, the darker kind. Where the names come from, so I'm gonna tell you where the names, you got the main 3 names I mentioned: Porter, Stouts, and Imperial. Stouts, most people think that, oh, we're gonna brew this style of beer, we're gonna brew it this way to make this style of beer. That's not how beers become. You basically just had everybody brewing beer, same style, and then all of a sudden one beer became brewed in a way that became darker, thicker, stronger, maltier, chocolatey, and that beer became acceptance, and that became a stout. So the stout was the beer variation that was dark and thick, because the word stout is really, it's just a word that means strong. You know, it's just an adjective. It just means strong. So something that's thicker, darker, stronger, they call it stout beer, strong beer. And that's where the word stout came in. Now, I told you stouts and porters were pretty much the same. They were the same. And then where the word porter come from. Okay, so now we have stout. Now we call them stouts. Now, stouts were manufactured, brewed by different people. And one particular brewery started making it thicker, maltier, and sweeter. So this particular style of stout became very popular in the 1700s around the piers, where all the sailors and all the pier workers were. And this is where a lot of England was. And remember, shipping was everything in England at those times. So all the small towns and all mostly the labor surrounded the piers. And all these laborers and piers began to like this style of beer. So all these workers, they were called ticket porters. So the beer became the beer of ticket porters. And to short it, it's just the porter beer and became porter. So that's where porter comes from. It's a variation of the stout. So imperial stout. Imperial stout is also a style of stout beer, and in the 1700s, the late 1700s, the Catherine the Great, the Empress of Russia, commissioned beer from England. Russia's been buying beer from England for over 100 years. But Catherine the Great commissioned a special kind of beer because she realizes that most Russians like a darker kind of beer, and the Brits, even their porter or their stouts, which is considered a strong beer, wasn't strong enough for the Russians. So I guess they like it strong over there. So Catherine the Great commissioned a beer that's even stronger, more alcohol, thicker, maltier. And this beer began to be shipped to the east, to Russia. And it was shipped to the Imperial Catherine the Great. And that's where that name caught on with that style. So it became an Imperial Stout thanks to Catherine the Great. So I hope you like this video. Check the thumbs up and let me know what you think. See you later, suckers.